Hi.
I don't know if I did this right.
What do you mean?
Hi, Megan.
Hi, Megan. Thank you for your note.
This is how the sausage is made.
All right, one last time. Why are we here?
What's your name again? What do we do?
Early happy hour.
This isn't water. I'm kidding.
You're right. We should have had a cocktail for this.
Yeah, we should next time, guys, right? Like, can we just make it a happy hour one? I have tea.
I don't think anybody wants me on happy hour. I'm kidding.
Hey, Beth.
Hello.
You joined the black t-shirt club as well.
You got the memo.
I got the memo. I got it late, but I got the memo.
I almost feel like this needs to be a lesson on inclusion. Somebody forgot to call Bruce and I. Like, what's up?
I'm a black person. I don't want to wear black. It's fine. Don't send me the memo. It's fine.
That is hilarious. Speaking of, though, since you mentioned you were black, I have to always change my settings when I come into.
Speaking of black, wait, Bruce, you're black?
I find that.
You just realized today.
Always has me looking like this.
Yeah, you got to change that settings.
The natural settings on Zoom, I won't do it now. I'm always super dark. As a matter of fact, I have a light over here because Zoom does not recognize. I don't know what it needs to recognize, but it doesn't catch me looking good ever.
I don't think it's Zoom. No,
I don't think that's unique to being black either. It never catches me looking good either.
It's so dark,
Alina, you should look at the searches on YouTube for how to set up a Zoom camera. There's 1,000 new videos that people have created to show you which cameras to buy, what kind of lighting you should have. It's insane. Ever since people have been working from home, there's a lot of videos.
Well, I just decided I bought this lamp thing. Well, you can't see it, but that's the only thing that helps.
Is it the circle lamp thing?
No, actually, it's not the circle thing. I got this thing from what's this? Best Buy. It is not a circle thing. It's a square light. It's a photography thing. Look, that was the best I could come up with because I found that I didn't like the square over the webcam because it blocked my ability to see the screen. So I chose something else, but it works. I mean, it's on a tripod and it's huge, but it works.
Wait, this thing is recording? I didn't get any sheet. I didn't get anything for me to sign saying that everything that I say will be owned by DisruptHR. It was.
Gotta get consent.
I know. We gotta ask first.
All right, everyone. We're going to give it another minute or two. It looks like we've got people still logging in. So we'll get started here in about a minute.
Still feels weird to be on one of these webinars where you can't see the other attendees joining with you. And I feel like I'm just in an intimate circle with y'all, but I realize there's like a bunch of people watching us. Like kind of weird.
There are currently people watching us.
We just graduated from an accelerator the first week in November, and during our demo day, there were 150 investors watching, but instead of it usually being in person, there were 150 people out there in the internet just listening. It was super weird.
Oh, that's really weird. Well, because also like in person, if you say something a little bit funny, you can tell if it was funny.
Right.
But here you're like, oh, was that bad? Should I?
You have no idea. You have no idea. You can't read people's facial expressions. It's just you and your screen, and you talk.
Hey, audience, if we say something funny, will you just give us a ha 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 in the chat so we know?
That would be great.
Yeah, that should be mandatory.
We need validation.
Oh, we're getting some ha-has in the chat.
Yes, thank you.
All right, guys, it's 4:03. So in the spirit of staying on time here tonight, let's get kicked off. I know some people are still logging in. On behalf of the Disrupt HR Philly crew, welcome to this important conversation. We actually had the first part of this conversation in June, and obviously found it so important that we wanted to continue. Here we are. I do wish we were all bumping shoulders and elbows at World Cafe Live, but maybe by the spring. So without further ado, I'll introduce our moderator, my good friend, Kristen Bacalar. Thanks for joining us, Kristen. Take off.
Thanks for having me, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for the second part of this. We put the band back together, as you can tell, and we're ready to dive in. This is about courageous action in HR. So we want to talk about what we've seen change, what we've seen not change, and have hopefully a really meaningful dialogue about all the things. And thank you for everyone. There's 54 people on who sent in some questions ahead of time and gave us some ideas. That is really helpful. And hopefully we'll get to a lot of those questions and those issues. So let's just jump in. So my question to our panelists here is, it's been what, 6-ish months. What have you seen that's different, or what have you seen that hasn't changed at all, much to your dismay? And I'll just call on people. So Kayla, let's start with you. What have you seen in the last 6 months?
So for me, and I think even for my organization, I will say I've seen a lot more energy. I've seen a lot more of our folks joining employee resource groups, which is something that we've been pushing for, honestly. To say, if you want to be an active ally, you need to get involved. You need to be a part of the communities. We've really started to see a little bit of a shift of folks taking a bit more ownership there, and willingness to step in to say, okay, cool, like I need to take some better steps to do this. So that's been some positive change I've seen. It's interesting you say 6 months, because it doesn't feel like it's been 6 months. I feel like it's almost honestly flown by in a sense. I feel like you say 6 months, I'm like, I wish we were kind of a little bit further. But the growth and the development we have had since then, it has been tremendous at the same time in comparison to the growth that you've seen or the change you might have seen over the course of 3, 5, 10, 15 years.
Yeah, 6 months in a pandemic somehow feels different than 6 months not in a pandemic, based on my limited experience. Mylena, how about you? What have you seen?
Let's see, what have I seen? When I'm dealing with employee groups, what I'm finding is this greater willingness to talk about organization culture challenges in general. In particular, people are talking about what they don't like pertaining to diversity, but in general, willingness to speak up about just dissatisfaction with organization culture. I'm seeing an uptick in that. I find also that, and I was remarking with a friend of mine, I said, this is a great time to be a Black woman in this space. It's like, oh my God, everybody wants to talk about, what do you think about diversity issues? While that might be true, what I'm also seeing is something that's been perennially true. People are asking me for information, people are asking for quotes, and then the diversity managers and directors are coming back with, my budget, I can't get a budget. So, lots of inquiries, but the same perennial challenges there with respect to not being able to get the level of funding to do a program that is not, quote unquote, just a standalone workshop, but looking at how do you shift from talking about issues to embedding some change into your culture.
Yeah, interesting. So a lot of willingness, a lot of talk, but still a barrier when it comes to allocating the right resources or getting the budget a little bit.
Indeed.
Yeah. Interesting. Bruce, what would you add? What have you seen in the last 6 months?
Sure. So we sell to HR and people ops leaders. And as I was discussing earlier in the prep before this, it's interesting. I've seen a lot less HR leaders discuss wanting to get more insight around diversity or DEI metrics. We do have some customers and HR leaders who are still talking about it, but it's nothing like it was 3-4 months ago, where literally every single demo that I did, every HR leader was saying, okay, we need to track DEI, and their eyes would light up when they saw the diversity section of our dashboard, and they would say, oh, oh, great, we can track people by gender and ethnicity, and then we can look at promotions and we can look at fair compensation. And now it seems that it shifted back to where it was before, where it's just more about all of the other general HR stuff and less about that. And I know it was very cliche to talk about making DEI more of a movement versus a moment, but I think a lot of people are really struggling and trying to figure out, how do you make that moment scalable? And how do you make that moment consistent? And what I heard over the past 6 months is that a lot of HR leaders were really stressed and anxious about not wanting to get something wrong. And that's just not an HR issue, but that's just a people issue, where people will have analysis paralysis, where you'll just think about so many things to do. And you know, the old adage, like, how do you eat an elephant, like one bite at a time? You really have to start off with one thing and then try to do that versus trying to do everything at the same time. So I think a lot of HR leaders and companies in general have been overwhelmed by trying to do too much with not enough resources, which has kept a lot of companies from doing anything at all.
Yeah, interesting. So the overwhelm, right, of all the things we're dealing with, somehow that D&I conversation that was top of everyone's mind has slowly kind of sunk down, and somehow something else has been prioritized, it sounds like, in your experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's so many major things that are happening. It's almost like the seasons, where you were shoveling snow in the middle of the winter, but then all the snow is melted and now it's the spring, and then you're worried about doing spring stuff. And then you'll worry about the winter when it's the winter again, but you forget the snow because the snow is gone. And that's how it feels. That was the big thing then, but then you got the presidential election, you have COVID and people going back to school and so many other things that they all are so big. It's hard for a lot of companies to prioritize right or wrong.
Yeah. Interesting. I want to dig into that a little bit more, but first let's hear from Beth. Beth, what about you? What have you seen in the last 6 months? Any changes or lack thereof?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll echo a lot of what Mylena and Bruce just touched on, which is, you know, I think that I'm not seeing the level of follow through, that there was like so much energy and ideas, and it felt like forward momentum 3-6 months ago. And now looking back, I'm like, was that all just talk? Right? Like, and I think when you start talking about resources, and I know that there's a question from somebody who wrote in about, you know, how do I convince senior leadership to give me resources for this? I'm like, you shouldn't have to, or maybe that's a sign that this was never important to them, right? Like, put your money where your mouth is, right? If I can't get money, if you're going to stock the beer fridge when we're back in the office, but I can't get money for our Black employees, like, that's a problem. And it really speaks volumes about what you really care about. So I think that there's a lot of truths being shown now that some of that dust has settled and we're really seeing what's actually happening or not happening.
Well, you all didn't paint a very positive picture here. It actually reminds me of something, Mylena, you said 6 months ago. I have it written down somewhere on my desk here, which was basically that your fear was that this was just the news cycle, right, in June, and that once there was another COVID surge, this was going to go away. And I believed you, but I was really hoping you would be wrong. But here we are. And interestingly, as we asked our participants to also share what they've seen. And I would say that there's some themes, right? A lot of conversation. We created a council, we created a committee. We've had some interesting conversations. There's more demand, greater awareness, but not a ton of true action or impact, right? In that way. So my question then, going back to Kayla, right? So you of us, you've had the most positive viewpoint. Let's kick everybody else off the panel and only talk to you. No, but I am curious to share more about the impact that you've seen, right? So I, you know, a little bit more about allyship, I think is what I heard you say. I'm curious about that. Share more about that.
Yeah, so, you know, it's interesting because I'm not gonna lie, I think I do feel a little bit of the energy from like Bruce, from Mylena, and from Beth. And I wonder, so I am a D&I professional for my organization, right? small but mighty team for the Aramark organization nationwide and serve as subject matter experts globally. And I wonder if it's because of the sheer nature of my power and my D&I leader as well. We're not letting the organization sit by and say that this was just a statement or a commitment. We created the Ally Network. We're consistently putting out content to keep those folks engaged, and we're having people. We actually just did an Ally training yesterday, which ended up having about 300 people on, talking about the search for greatness and why it's important, that talent pipeline. And it was hiring managers on that call, right? Usually you only pull in recruiters to that conversation. We're taking it and putting some ownership on the hiring managers now who really have that power. The call before that, we had a panel discussion where employees were specifically talking about their experiences talking about race at work. And that blew out the water. We had 600 people on the call, wow, plus another 250 are we at 250? Probably a little bit more than that, I think, at that point, of viewers afterwards watching the recording. And I was like, I didn't realize people went back and watched this type of stuff. But it's snowballing a little bit. But I think we're not letting it sit. We're not saying that we can just have that one email that went out back in June or whatever and let it be. No, we're continuing to push for change. We're continuing to push for allyship. We're continuing to give them resources and show, hey, you guys need to get involved. This is not just D&I team's issue to make change happen. We're putting some ownership and equipping and empowering our employees to make that change happen for themselves and within their teams as well.
Yeah, that's great. I love this idea of allyship, and there were a lot of questions around this. So when we kind of get to the workshop in quotes section, I want to talk more about that. One thing, Mylena, that you were saying though is this willingness to talk about D&I, but also in general sort of culture and organizational change. And one thing that I've always noticed is that when we create a culture that is good for our Black employees and for our gay employees and for our Latino employees, it creates a culture that's good for everyone. And yet I think there are a lot of people that think, oh, we have to do something special for this group. Excuse me. There's probably a lot of white people who think, oh, we have to do something special for this group. When the reality is, if you make this culture great for everyone, it's going to be great for everyone. So tell me a little bit more about some of the work that you've been doing around, or the conversations you've been having around, in general, organizational culture and changes in that way.
I find that people miss just what you're saying. When you talk about improving organization culture, if you really look to, and for me, let me frame it this way. When I talk about organization culture and diversity work, I actually focus on the inclusion part more than the diversity part, simply because when you talk about what it means to make space for people, I usually come at it through the angle of, let's talk about cultural norms and privilege, and think about how somebody is always left out when you start talking about what norms are. Whether it's Black employees, gay employees, people with a different religious affiliation, once you start to set up norms, then you have to ask yourself, who is that norm not taking into consideration? And I think what we have to do and get organizations to consider is how often they are having these conversations about who's on the outside of those norms. And the challenge is people don't want to ask those questions, because I think people are starting to become a little bit fatigued with it. They're just like, well, somebody needs to suck it up. I think there's this default that we have in many spaces about get over it. Everybody's, conforming somewhere. What makes this particular group special? I think you have a little bit of that. But what I also realize that a lot of people have accepted is that there's just this game we have to play where we go to work and we can't be authentic. There was a study done some years ago, I believe by the McKinsey Group, where they talked about covering. And with that being said, I think the statistic was that there was about 48 or 49% of straight white men who cover some part of their identity. And the question that I always ask is, what's up with this covering? If everybody is faking it, for what purpose? Who is this serving? And that's the challenge when we talk about inclusion for Black employees. I think when you think about inclusion for Black employees, it's because Black people are covering more of their identity than other groups. But if you can start to deal with why we're covering and looking at the different layers that people are covering of themselves and start to peel those back so people have space to be who they are, then frankly, you can drop some of the faking it so that people can come to work and actually do their jobs as opposed to pretending and hiding more of who they are. I mean, frankly, I don't know how your social circle has been working, but something as simple as the fact that we're doing so much on Zoom now and people are seeing into people's lives, that has upped the ante for people with respect to anxiety. What are they thinking about my life? What if my partner walks through? What if my kid is in the room? And these are real fears and conversations that people are having about who they are. And I think, frankly, we've got to get to a place where we keep asking that question. It needs to become reflexive. Hey, if we have these norms and expectations, why? Where did they come from? And who are we leaving out? Somebody needs to have the responsibility on a team within a group to make sure that we keep that, frankly, that question kind of floating out there. We need to make it like a volleyball game. We're back and forth. Somebody needs to always bring it up. And frankly, you just can't tire of it. It's like budgeting. I hate to crunch my numbers at the end of the month too, but you got to do it. And I think that's how we need to see some of these challenges around diversity and inclusion in particular. You got to keep asking the question because it's easy to frankly give into your habits and do simply what's comfortable for you without thinking about who that is uncomfortable for.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm connecting this, who it's uncomfortable for, and your earlier statement around looking at cultural norms and privilege. And I'm curious about when we are, and this is a question that kind of came in from our audience, when we are around people that don't really think that white privilege is a thing, how do we actually handle that conversation? Beth, have you run into people who don't think that white privilege is a thing?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, and I'll be honest, like when I was thinking about this question all week, I mean, I've always known that white privilege was a thing, but it wasn't until this June that I really started to examine all of the ways in which I've benefited from it. I think that is a pretty common story for many, many, many white folks. Some of us have, you know, like really doubled down and done the work and said, wow, that feels uncomfortable. That's, and like get past it and have those hard conversations and kind of peel back the ugly parts of yourself and work through it. A lot of white folks haven't gotten there yet. And I don't know what the right or wrong answer is. You know, everybody's on their own journey, but I mean, the reality is my aha moment was like, I was raised in a racist country and taught a racist education. Like, of course there are racist parts of me, like that I never saw because I was taught not to see them. Right. And I think that that's really, really common. And it's really, really hard. Like, no matter how self-aware, like hippy dippy into the work and how close you are with your therapist, like it's hard. And so I think that it is a really important conversation, and we really need to, just because people aren't comfortable having it doesn't mean we should stop trying, right? But it's gonna keep being hard for a lot of people to really get there because it calls into question everything that you thought was true about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder, I'm going to guess that people on this panel have had some experiences trying to talk to that prototype, that person who doesn't really think that white privilege is a thing, about D&I, right? And about some of the advantages. So I'll just kind of go around. Bruce, have you had that experience? And if so, how did you handle it? How do you have that conversation with someone who doesn't really see it like you do?
It's interesting because I think it's hard to tell who believes white privilege is real versus not. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it's as black and white as I think it exists or I don't think it exists, or at least in my experience. I don't think I've come across individuals that said, I don't think this exists, more so than talking to people saying that everyone has the same opportunity. And maybe it's almost the same thing just said in a different way, but it's never come across as, oh, well, this whole white privilege thing. Like, no one's naming it and saying, I don't think that this is a thing. It's more so, I have come across people who are saying, I just think everybody has the same opportunity. And when I go and explain why that's not true, then it turns into a debate of, well, I don't really see it that way. And to me, honestly, I'm just exhausted trying to change people's minds. I'm like, you know what, the hell with it. Changing somebody's mindset about anything, literally anything, is one of the hardest things to do on earth.
Yep.
And to be honest, sometimes I just don't see the ROI and exhausting hours and hours of my day trying to change this person. Whereas, you know what, I'm like, you know what, I think it's actually better to just focus on the people who don't believe that, or at least open to listening.
Yep.
And start with those people, and then hopefully that becomes the majority versus trying to change the mind of someone who won't listen. And I think people are trying to do that. And then that's where you get all of this butting heads and clashing and the arguing, and then it becomes politicized and it becomes so much bigger than the actual root cause of the conversation. That I think for me, it's a better strategy to just focus on people who are open-minded, and hopefully the people who are open-minded look the same, act the same, talk the same as the people who are closed-minded, and then maybe they could go in and hopefully they can set a behavior, and then people can look at them and say, oh, okay, well, maybe I was wrong. But I'm cautiously optimistic about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where it comes back to the responsibility of people that look like me more so than people that look like you, right? Like, it's got to be exhausting to continuously try to convince someone else that your experience is real and that, right? And so I do think that white people helping white people is probably helpful in this space. Kayla, I'm curious with you though. You've got this sort of allyship training and a big movement happening at Aramark. Privilege has got to come up in that. How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think talking about privilege is always an interesting space to be in. So, I kind of like live in a little bit two worlds, right? Aramark, I'm a D&I professional. So like, I'm expected to talk about this. Like, if you're going to come talk to me, like, just know that I'm going to call you out on something. I'm going to try and correct you on something. We're going to try and figure this out and work on this together. And I've also had another on the exact opposite experience of where I've gotten in my personal life, because most of y'all, if you know me, I'm biracial. So I am half Black, half white in like central PA white, like Appalachian Mountain white. Like, I have resolved to not go back to visit my family for a very long time, as long as it's the current administration, which 2021, yay. See some family I haven't seen in a while, because specifically because I can't talk about things like this. I can't talk about privilege because they don't get it. Right? They're like, well, I'm poor. I don't have privilege. I don't have access to the things that you're talking about. You have more than I do, and you identify as a person of color. And I say, well, that's not it though. Like, because if you walk down the street, privilege is about not people assuming those things of you. So that has been, it's interesting. So I have had to have those really difficult conversations that I've kind of taken this stance with Bruce, where honestly, I'm just not having it because you're not even open to it. Whereas I'm lucky to also then be in an organization where I can have some of that open conversation and that willingness to learn. Granted, I will say that I think I'm only having conversations with people that are approaching me, right? Even our ally network is still voluntary, right? If we have we have thousands of employees nationwide, and we're only getting a small percentage that are coming to the conversations. So, but I'm taking that similar stance again with Bruce, is like, okay, we talk to one person, how then they can disseminate it. The one really cool aspect of our ally network is that it's really bringing in those mid-level managers, which we always know is the funnel effect, right? When it comes to D&I related initiatives, there's a lot of work that happens at the top. You have a lot of awesome employees who are getting involved at the ground, grassroots with the employee resource groups. And then it's like a stopgap right here at the middle with the middle managers. And our ally network has been doing a really awesome job of pulling those managers in, but we've been also very intentional about showing representation and having identifying managers who are willing to step up and speak about it and talk about it. So like I said, we did that panel discussion. I think it honestly was one of the most powerful things we could do, because other field, and we were super intentional about having representation of women. So it was 2 women, one was a white woman, one was a Black woman, and then 2 men. One was a Black man, one was a white man. And we were very intentional about ensuring that it was functional leaders, so like people that you see in the corporate office, but operational leaders as well. We had general managers, operational managers, vice president of operations, and then people could see in the Zoom meeting as well that their own managers were in here and involved in this conversation as well. So I think that representation and finding those key champions who are willing to speak up and speak out, and even be vulnerable enough to share their stories about, yeah, honestly, I didn't get it right the first couple times. Having these conversations about privilege or having these conversations about race went a long way for us to continue to hopefully snowball to create more allies and to make some change happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. On this topic of allies, one of the questions that came in was basically, if I'm understanding it correctly, how do I, as a white person, be a good ally, but then not speak for someone on behalf of someone? Like, where's the balance? There's a lot of questions that came in, and the themes were around balance. How do I be a good ally but not speak for someone, right? And I'm curious what thoughts this panel has on that. Mylena, I might start with you if that's all right. How do I find the balance of being a good anti-racist white person but not speak on your behalf or speak for you?
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. I will say this. In my life, I have two girlfriends who are white. In the words of Forrest Gump, these are two of my best good friends. And one of the things that I find that has been interesting as I've watched them as two white women, frankly, two Southern white women, rural Georgia Southern white women. You talk about Central PA, go to Southern Georgia. And listening to them sort out issues around race and how they engage me around it has been interesting. And I actually see the courage that it takes for them to approach being an ally. So with one of them, her family is very much so conservative. And the other one, her family is the typical, liberal group of white folks, and it's two very different groups of people to evaluate. And I watched the one friend who his family is very conservative, the risks she takes to not necessarily speak for people of color, Black folks for me, but to make it clear that she is not okay with some of the bigotry that she observes. And so what she does in her space is to go, look, I might not have all the answers, but we both know something is wrong with this, or we both know that this should not be acceptable. On the flip side, with my other girlfriend, whose family is a lot more liberal, what I see with her, interestingly, is that she is much more out in the open about her perspectives. But what I also see is that in her personal life, she's much more open, but in her professional life, I think she's a bit guarded because she's afraid of backlash in her job. And so with that, I'm finding the comparison to be different. And what I find is that the person who's a little bit more fearful at her job, she is a little bit more tactical with respect to what she speaks out about. I wonder sometimes if she manages her fears and perhaps guilt about not being as strong in her opinion at work through some of the money that she gives to various causes. I think that's her way of trying to make up for it. So with that being said, what I really think makes a really big difference with respect to being an ally, speaking your truth and standing in it. I think for one of my girlfriends, she's looking for the courage to do that more, whereas the other person is okay with taking the risk. And I think the difference between the two really is looking at, okay, what are my personal values? And really and truly, how am I going to accept the risk that comes with living with them? And I think one of them has made a lot more progress than the other. And I think, frankly, you can't really be a good ally until you make the decision about what you're willing to, I don't want to say pay for your perspectives, but that's really kind of what I believe. It's tough. At the end of the day, I find that for me, I do the same thing around LGBT issues. I grew up in a very Christian background. And frankly, some of the things that I hear people in my social life say around gay and trans people, look, you don't have to like it, but we're not going to have this conversation either. And I think a lot of it really has to do with being clear about your values and recognizing that there's some risk and being accepting of that risk.
Yeah. So sort of speaking from your own truth and your own kind of convictions and having the courage to do that is kind of what I'm hearing from you. That's great. That's great. Another question on this theme of sort of finding the balance is around intervening, right? How do is it intervening or educating or advocating or defending when I see something that doesn't feel right? And the person that asked this didn't give examples, but if I think about it, right, if I think of a hiring manager who is making decisions that appear to be prejudiced, or, a leader who's making decisions that, are masked in, I just don't have a good feeling about it, but there might be some racial undertones or something else. How do we intervene? How do we educate? How do we advocate? And I know this is a tricky one with such a vague kind of question, but I am curious if anyone has any tidbits. Beth, have you had to be in that position or seen it, or do you have any pointers for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to a lot of what Mylena said. Is it definitely takes some bravery, and there is potentially some risk involved, right? Like, I always think about power dynamics. So who is this person in relationship to me, and what's the right way to, just because they're the CEO doesn't mean they shouldn't be educated, right? Or just because they're my boss, or just because they're the intern, like, and I have the power in the situation. Like, I try to be aware of those power dynamics to inform how the education takes place, right? Like, sometimes it's appropriate. Like, somebody had written about like call out versus call in. Calling out meaning to sort of educate publicly, call in mean to educate privately. And I tend to go the call in route most frequently because I've found that people can kind of hear it a little bit better when they're sort of not worried about the dynamics of who else is in the room and hearing this and feeling a little like, you know, your defenses go up. But I've had situations this year and like literally every year before in my career where I've had to say like, tell me more, what do you mean by culture fit? What do you mean you don't feel like they're very buttoned up? What does it mean to be buttoned up, right? Like, define these words that are very blurry and can be interpreted wildly different from person to person. Tell me what it means to you. Because a lot of the time, not all the time, but a lot of the time, there is some racial or discriminatory element behind that, and they know what they're not allowed to say, so they bury it in culture fit, they bury it in like, oh, professionalism. But when you try to dig down below those levels, usually you find out that it was some sort of bigotry because they don't have an answer, because they know they can't say that out loud at work. And so then they're sort of at a loss of like, oh, I guess we have to interview this person, or I guess we have to consider this person for the promotion because I can't explain why I don't want to, because I have no actual facts. And sometimes you find out that they do have facts and they're just themselves not the greatest communicator, and they lean on these kind of fuzzy, blurry words that they've heard in corporate America for their whole career. And it really is like, that kind of language is so, it's just like self-perpetuating. And I've always been out to try to stop it because it just doesn't serve anybody.
Yeah. You want to try to move the needle on that, Beth?
I'll circle back, Kristen.
Circle back. We can take that offline. No, what I think, what's great about that is, right, is your approach is, let me ask a whole bunch of questions to try to get you to realize that this is not great, right? And maybe it's not as explicit or direct as, hey, I think you might be making a racist decision, but actually, oh, tell me more about why that is, and how, and what are what is the issue, and what does buttoned up mean, and what's wrong with it? Like, and then they get to the point where like, oh, actually, I guess it doesn't really matter, or it's not, whatever I thought was a problem might not be, which is a good tactic.
And I'd love to add an additional kind of tidbit there too as well. Well, two tidbits actually. First and foremost, like talking about like, is something professional? Let's talk about how professional is kind of rooted in white traditions and cultures and establishments and like whatever. So talking about systemic like racism and processes, like asking if somebody's professional usually means, are they conforming to white standards? Because it's usually based on white standards. So I love those questions like that. But if you don't feel so like equipped to maybe call out someone and fully educate them, but you know that statement was wrong, right? You know it was weird, you know it doesn't sit right, it's okay to just be like to pause, right? Just to be that other person and just say, and like taking an extra 30 seconds after somebody says something that feels inappropriate makes them think about what they just said too. So you don't always have to feel like you know all the answers. You don't have to be out here being the like D&I expert and the subject matter expert out here educating, being on your woke soapbox, educating everyone. But you can still just take a quick moment to maybe not even publicly call them out, but just say, And that pause is just enough, or be like, ouch. Like I've heard people use ouch too as well, that they like. So like you can say little tiny like moments, that extra 30 seconds or 10 seconds does a lot.
Yeah, that's great. I want to move on to another topic, or actually it's a similar topic, but a couple of you had mentioned sort of the political implications of this, and you're not going to go to your hometown until there's a new administration, et cetera, and I think we can all agree that issues like this have become highly politicized, and it feels, at least to me, like I'm living in a country where either I can be pro diversity initiatives, which means I'm liberal, or I can be against diversity initiatives, which means I'm conservative or Republican. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground. And one of our participants wrote, participants wrote in a very courageous way, I thought, and asked, well, what about the people that, you know, live and or work in a more conservative, sort of pro-America, Republican type environment? How do we bring them along in the conversation? And I think it's worthy of discussing if you all are willing. And I'll open it up. Who has a response? And if there's more than 20 seconds of silence, you know, I'll just pick someone.
I'll jump in.
Yeah, good.
So my first thought in this, because it's something that's actually, I mean, my organization leans very, very liberal, but we have had conversations about, you know, what if we hired someone who was much more conservative and didn't align to sort of the predominant political belief in the building, right? Like and I'm like, that's inclusion too, right? If we're going to talk about inclusion, guys, that Republican needs to feel included. They need to feel like they belong and that they're welcome. Now, hate has no place. And so that's a different thing, but that's not necessarily, you can be a Republican and not be hateful. So that's like, I think you can, Marlena. But like, that was where I draw the line. Hate has no place. That's against our values, right? It doesn't matter what your political affiliation is. That's against our values. That is not welcome here. Mm-hmm. But if you are politically conservative in a room full of very liberal Democrats, like you're the outsider. You feel often you're already sort of putting your guard up the way that anyone who is the other in a situation has to cover and protect, right? So I think it's important for me. It's just keep it human, right? So like, don't lead with defunding the police. Just talk about the human element, right? And maybe that would be maybe a good way to bring them into the conversation of like, well, how do you feel when you're the only when you're the only person with your belief system in a room full of liberal people? How does that make you feel? Like, let's talk about that and realize that other people experience similar feelings when they are the only of, you know, whatever group in a group.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
And we recently did something as well to talk about immigration, which I think is highly politicized. Mm-hmm. And we said we're focusing on the human rights aspect of this. Black Lives Matter's human rights issue. Some of the stuff that's happening on the border with immigration and asylum seekers is a human rights issue, and that's what we focused on. So that's how we've approached it as well, to have that discussion.
Yeah, interesting. So sort of explicitly trying to take the politics out of it and focusing on one piece of the issue. Yeah, interesting. Bruce, you are the only in this group, the only man. What would you add to this conversation? What have you seen or experienced when it comes to sort of the political nature of this topic?
It's interesting that you pointed out that, excuse me, I'm the only man here, because if you can see, well, typically you can see gender and know if a person is a man or a woman. You can typically see if someone's skin color and their ethnicity, but what you will not ever be able to see, unless they literally have it tattooed or wear a t-shirt, say, hey, I'm a Republican, is somebody's political affiliation. And it's funny that you brought that up, because I'm literally looking at the screen and I'm thinking, like, oh, wow, I'm the only guy here. And how difficult would it be to know if someone is the other, but they never spoke up about it?
Interesting.
As I'm thinking about this conversation and listening to what everyone's saying, I'm even taking a step back to even understand, and I'm trying to ask myself and answer this question in real time. What does it mean to even allow that person to be open that they are other or different in the first place? Especially now when so many people, and I don't want to pick on millennials, but especially a lot of millennials, even though I think I'm kind of one, and no one really knows the gray age of being a millennial.
You're a millennial, Bruce. Deal with it.
All right, thank you. Well, then I'll pick on myself, even though I'm an older millennial. But you have a lot of millennials in the workforce, and they're saying, hey, CEO, hey, president, hey, C-suite, pick a lane. Are you for this thing? Are you against this thing? I need you to be public. I need the company to be public about this thing. And so it's interesting to me, and I don't even know if this is really answering a question more so than asking more questions, but how do you move into this new space where companies, CEOs, C-suite leaders are being forced to publicly pick a lane, but then also make people feel inclusive enough and comfortable enough to actually bring this thing up when they know that the company has this specific stance. And so I guess if I'm asking and answering my own question, I think it really comes down to, as Beth, I think that's what you were saying about bringing on a human level and letting people know that we're not going to hate you, or you're not stupid, or any of the other words that people use on any of the news channels when they're talking about the other party. Just be you, do you, and represent whatever you represent. Sure, everyone's not going to agree with what you do, how you think, how you feel, but it's probably better to just say it and let people know what you're doing. And at least people will know, so that maybe they'll be more respectful if they are saying things that, are not sensitive. It is such a very gray, squishy topic because, to your point, there's so many people in the middle. You might hate one thing, but you appreciate the other thing, which makes it so difficult to even be a part of any political association or affiliation in the first place. And so for a company or any organization to allow people to be open and be sensitive about all those things, but also take a public stance, I think is almost impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've gotten ourselves into sort of a binary pickle, right? Either you're with us or you're against us, which is dangerous, I think, in general. And the other thing I'm hearing is somehow our organizations are starting to mimic our society, in that the employee's voice is forcing and causing the movements, right? The employees seem to be demanding a point of view or a stance from the company and from the leadership. In the same way, our protests and our movements and our activism in our society is demanding politicians, et cetera, to take a stance and make a decision. And I think that's really an interesting observation, right? The similarities in how decisions are starting to get made. It used to be very much top down in organizations, and it feels to me like things are starting to bubble up at the bottom and work their way up in this sort of social movement kind of way.
I think the biggest thing that we can do, and especially, white people from an ally standpoint, is that when you are talking to people and calling people out on the stuff that they're doing, I think it always needs to start off with, just because you did X doesn't mean you're Y. And I think always needs to be the level set of the conversation. Because what I see happening is that person A goes to person B and says, hey, you shouldn't have did this, and whether it's ouch or ill or wow or whatever the word is to let this person know that they did something weird or insensitive to a certain group, that person is automatically on the defensive. Because our political parties and the way that at least our country is set up now, you either have to be one way or the other. And if anybody says anything to you that makes you feel like that person feels like that you're stupid or you're not as smart or you're whatever because you're associated with that party, you all of a sudden start taking offense to it. And you feel like they're backing you into a corner. And so I think that conversation always needs to start off with, hey, I'm about to say this, and it's unfortunate that we even need to give this caveat, but I think in the society that we are in today, I think it always needs to start off with, hey, I'm not saying that you're X, I'm just saying that this is something that I need to point out. And again, just because I'm saying that you did X doesn't mean that you're Y, it just means that it's something that you may not be aware of that you're doing.
It's such a good point, Bruce. I had a conversation at work a couple months ago about some biases that I had noticed in an interview process. Nothing like crazy, but I was just like, let's educate, right? Like, let's talk about this. And the first response was, well, I don't think our team is racist. And I was like, well,
right.
Like, I didn't say racist. I said, I saw some bias in the decision-making, right? But I agree with you, Bruce. I think that the walls can go up really, really quickly and people go on the defensive, especially in today's climate. Like, I think that there is, like Kristen was saying, this like very binary, if you're not with us, you're against us. And that's, I think that wall comes up as a result of feeling like, oh, I'm now being attacked.
One of the things that I have chosen to do, I don't necessarily feel like it's my job necessarily to educate when somebody's walls are all the way up. I have really worked on my own sense of self-control so that I can actually ask questions. Because I had turned into that person as soon as I heard someone start off even moving in a direction that I thought was antithetical to my perspective. I'm that person. And frankly, you can't do this kind of work with that kind of attitude. It kind of, doesn't work. But one of the things that I really work to do has been to move to a place where I stopped assuming anything, and I aim to go curious. Not because I'm trying to make a point even with my questions, because sometimes we can ask questions in a way that we're trying to lead somebody to draw a particular conclusion. No, I'm trying to really understand how you came to this perspective. And that's what my go-to is when I'm having a conversation with someone whose opinion is so far from mine. I'm really trying to understand it, because what I always hold out in terms of how I engage people in general. Okay, so I want to understand their path to this perspective, because maybe if I understood how they got to this belief system, maybe they could actually hear me if I were to offer a counter perspective. But until I aim to hear that, they're going to pick up on, frankly, the criticism in my perspective, my viewpoint. And now we're back to that whole argument, which is a whole entire waste of time and energy. Because we know if you talk to somebody who's diametrically opposed to you, they know that. It's like what we had with the election. Nobody at some point was really trying to convince the other person. It just became about arguing your point the loudest. And so what I really aim to do is to ask questions. And though some people might think it's paltry, I've even looked at some personal things with respect to like reading books and things like that, just to see if I can really understand how people who are on the other side of the table think. I actually even read some people who were uber conservative, just again, to allow myself to hear those perspectives. And I must admit, even listening to an audiobook, I got aggravated. So just think about, if I have this reaction to an audiobook, what is my body language like when I'm actually talking to a person? And so what I have been really working on is this sense of self-regulation, so that I can be present enough to have the conversation. Because the one thing I don't want to do, frankly, is lose it and contribute to their wall going up even higher. But with respect to trying to forcibly get somebody to change their perspective, I think that's an absolute waste of time and energy. So I have decided to take the other approach. I want to understand it. And in some cases, believe it or not, I even look at it through the eyes of empathy. Like, what happened to certain people and certain groups for them to feel so fearful about what our society is evolving into? I have a friend of mine, grew up in the city, families from a working class background, and I've never met anybody who is more anti-immigrant. And at the end of the day, his fear and his concern is about economics. He believes he's being replaced, and he's all of these theories about who's not paying taxes and who's getting over. And I'm like, where do you get this information from? And to the point I made about asking questions, the more I talk to him, he has no idea where these pieces of information he has came from. Such and such doesn't pay taxes for 7 years. These people this and these people, bruh, why are you coming up with this? And at the end of the day, to really ask questions to get people to answer them. It's amazing the things that people have just heard, just, adages, quotes that they have no basis in fact. And I think, frankly, giving them a space to actually explain themselves has been useful for me. And oftentimes, I think the unintended benefit for them is that they see that they have no basis for these opinions. It's just fear or whatever other emotion that they have. But that's been my tactic.
Yeah, so positioning sort of curiosity at the core and asking questions and really trying to, because here's one of my favorite quotes is, you cannot be curious and certain at the same time.
Indeed.
And so if we can lean into the curiosity, then we open up our minds to just learn a little bit more, or at least hear someone else's point of view. That's great. A question has come in live from our audience. I'd love to ask it. The question says, when should something be a deal breaker for organizations? I agree that individuals aren't all good or all bad, but do you think that there are minimum standards for acceptance? So I think the answer is yes, of course, but I think there's some nuance there, right? And is it corporate values that determine that? Is it the law that determines that? Is it the, some employee thing that you signed 12 years ago when you got hired. So I am curious of what this what this panel thinks. Kayla, let's start with you. What would you say in response to this person's question?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's a company's values and what they're willing to stand up for. I think every company is a little bit of like a person, right? It has its own personality, has its own culture, it has its own things that are important to them. So at the end of the day, you know, you have to figure out, are you a little bit more of a liberal organization? Are you a little bit more conservative organization? Are you going to be upright and speak out about certain things that you as an organization or your leadership team feels are not right? Like you could be the Ben and Jerry's out here and like creating ice creams about Black Lives Matter, right? Like that's very, very specific. Or you can be super, super conservative and say, well, maybe do some things quieter on our own, or choose to totally ignore it as well and say, we're not going to do it at all. But I think when you make those decisions, at the end of the day, you have to understand the repercussions of then said decisions. Understand that if you're going to choose to be super liberal, you're going to alienate somebody. There's going to be some folks who may not be interested in joining your organization. And then that's where as folks and as us as the workforce, you know, we have the power to pick and choose where we want to work, where we want to put our hours and where we want to put our labor time into, where that quote unquote culture fit is important. So I feel like that's not a clear cut yes or no, but at the end of the day, like I think you have to make a decision, be firm and then be consistent in it. And I think that's the problem. You can't be wishy-washy or do things performatively. That is the turn off at the end of the day. At least be authentic in it.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I'm hearing in what you're saying, Kayla. So one is, yeah, as people who really care about diverse and inclusive cultures, we want to make it inclusive for everybody. And we will not sacrifice our values to do so. So if you come in and you can't live up to these values or this cultural expectation, then you can't be here. It's kind of what I'm hearing you say maybe I'm being a little more harsh than you were.
I don't know if it's entirely clear cut as like you can't be here at all. But you know, you're gonna have to. I got some really great advice one day from my own personal branding that was like, you know, you're gonna have to give up something, right? You're either gonna have to give up aspects of yourself that you might find really, really important from a brand, or you're gonna have to give up the organization you work for. And I think it's something similar as an organization that you may have to sometimes pick and choose what's important to you. Granted, there's a lot of evidence around diversity and inclusion being very important to your bottom line. So you may be giving up some money there too, but you know, to each its own, and it's your business to make those decisions with.
Yeah, I do a lot of culture work, and one of my favorite ways to describe culture is the worst behavior that you tolerate. And if you tolerate bad behavior, that becomes your culture. It's just really sort of interesting. Beth, you are also sort of working internally in an HR function. How would you respond to that question of you know, is there ever a deal breaker, right? And you know, are there minimum standards for acceptance?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo a lot of what Kayla said. And I love what you said, Kayla, about companies are kind of like people, they have personalities. And that got me thinking, but people are all sort of at different points in their journeys of self-discovery and how solid they are and who they truly are deep down, right? And companies are the same. So all the companies have their values, they paint them on the wall. Not all companies firmly live inside of those values and use them to make decisions. Many do, many don't, most are somewhere in between. And I think the closer you are to really firmly living in those values, using them to make decisions and just being authentically who you are as a company, you can tell, like you said, Kristen, it's like you can tell these candidates during the interview process, this is who we are. This is what we believe. This is how we reward. This is what it is, right? And if that doesn't jive with what you're looking for, that's okay. There's other companies that believe different things. Go find a company. It's like dating. It's like go find somebody that believes the things that you believe, right? Like be happy together. You don't have to date me if you believe the opposite of what I believe. And I feel like from my perspective, the best companies are like that really just secure, I've done the work, self-aware person who just knows who they are. It will tell the world, is very consistent with it, and you just know what you're getting. And then the candidates, the people, your vendors, even clients, candidates, whoever's going to interact with your brand, with your company, knows who you are, and they can decide if who you are is who they want to do business with. And I think that's sort of the best case scenario to answer the question. But that said, like, there's so many companies who say they know who they are, but then when you look behind the curtain at how they actually make decisions and what they actually reward, it's a lot of times in direct conflict with what they say they value. And like for smart candidates, I feel like that should be the deal breaker. Like the employee should get to call deal breaker on that. But yeah, I think if you really want to be able to call deal breaker on any employee or vendor or client, you have to start by knowing who you are and what's important and really being consistent with that.
You know, it's funny, as you were talking, Bethany, I was totally there with you about how a lot of organizations really don't know who they are. In my work as an external consultant going in to work with teams, what I see all too often are leadership teams who are afraid to own who they are. One of the things that I think is very important is to do that work to figure out what your actual values are, what you're going to stand up for, and articulate that so that employees have the ability to choose whether or not they want to work there in the first place. And one of the things that I even shared at the beginning, we were talking about this, I was actually somewhat perplexed earlier this year. A couple months ago when Coinstar decided that they were going to make a statement that they were not, in fact, going to talk about this social justice crap at all. And I was actually happy. You know why? Because a lot of companies feel that way, but they won't say it. And then what they do, they call people like me in to go through all of these shenanigans to talk about what their options are to get services. You know, do we want to do assessments and all of this? Knowing full well, they are really not serious about it. I appreciate the fact that not only did Coinstar say we're not going to do it, but I mean, they were like, look, we will pay you to leave. I was like, hey, ball game. They told you what you're dealing with. They didn't, you know, make you come to work every day and question it. Now, you might argue by choosing not to have an opinion, they've also made some choices there too. But with that being said, I think that organizations have to be clear about where they are. And I also think that when you talk about alignment, with respect to cultural values and how you want your organization to operate, I think you do need to be clear about that so you can figure out how you're going to make your messaging not only resonate with your employees, but also with your customers. There should be some general alignment across your entire organization. And I think you necessarily have to be clear about what your values are, even if your value is we don't deal with these kinds of topics. I think you need to be clear to figure out how do you serve the people that you claim constitute your stakeholder. You gotta figure out that lane, and you gotta be willing to, frankly, make a tough choice, even if the choice is we're gonna be mute on an issue that everybody else in the world thinks we shouldn't be, you know, but I think you gotta do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with you. I respect that company more for saying this is not something we care about. We care about making. I think what he said, our mission is to make money.
Yes, that's what he said.
Yeah, that's what we're here to do. So I respect. I don't agree with it, but I respect it, and I would rather work for a company that said that than a company that was like, yeah, it's important, but then doesn't give me any money or any resources, or doesn't change their behaviors, or a slew of other things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
On that note, a couple of questions that came in from our participants were around how to get upper management to give us budget, resources, time, attention, behavior, etc. I'm curious if Bruce, you work with HR leaders every day. Have you seen them doing anything that's been really successful, or do you have any ideas for what could make them more successful in getting resources from upper management towards diversity initiatives?
So without doing a shameless plug, I mean, the answer is data, but that comes with a caveat. Excuse me. And the caveat is, and I don't know if it was Kayla or Mylena, you had referenced that there's a lot of case studies out there from McKinsey and Accenture and Deloitte and all these companies saying that once you have a more diverse workforce, you will outperform other companies. But the problem is, and I think I may have stated this in the last talk that we had back in June, is that most companies have actually, and most founders, especially I know in the startup space, most founders are white males, they have never experienced a company where if it was more diverse, it actually did better. Excuse me. And so you're dealing with this weird thing where everybody's saying, hey, if you have a more diverse workforce, your company will do better. Yet the founder is looking and saying, well, everybody's white and we just raised $100 million. So, and that company, everybody was white, and I sold it for $200 million. And my friend over there, he just went IPO for $20 billion, and almost everybody is white. So what are you telling me? And so it's a really hard position. Back to what Beth said about you shouldn't have to make a business case about diversity. It should just be something that you should do. It kind of falls into that bucket. I truly believe, and this is even as a person who helps HR leaders use data, when we talk to them about how do they make a business case for this, sometimes I have to say data is actually not the thing that you want to use to make a business case for why your business should be more diverse, more so than data should be the thing that you should use to figure out where you're the least diverse, and then try to become more diverse in those areas. You actually have to already have internal, a default level of buy-in from your executive team to say, we want to be diverse because we just believe it's the right thing to do. And so it is a difficult thing to try to sell a business owner or a CFO, whoever controls the purse strings, on why the company should be more diverse when a lot of people don't believe that it's actually going to have a positive business impact. So I think it really has to come from a personal standpoint of, hey, we need more diversity here because maybe we sell a product and a meaningful percentage of our customers are people from all different types of backgrounds, and we actually might lose money. It's not a we will do better, it's we actually might be losing money, or we actually might get called out for this. I mean, sometimes it just might be, hey, we might get in trouble for this. We might get publicly shamed for this. I mean, sometimes you actually maybe even need to take an emotional route to this, and it's not going to be cut or dry. I think you're just going to have to A/B test and say, okay, did they think the emotional route worked? Oh, nope, they don't give a damn about that. Okay, all right, well, let's see if we say that we'll lose customers because we don't have a diverse workforce. And if we get caught out, we didn't get caught out today, but no one thinks they're ever going to get caught out until they get caught out. Or maybe we don't want this to be a legal problem or a compliance problem. I think you really need to A/B test and see what's going to pull on the heartstrings or the emotions or the pocketbook or whoever that person is you need to convince, because it's not a one size fits all across all organizations.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you, it's knowing you have to speak the same language as the person you're talking to, right? So if they talk in the language of dollars and cents and that's all I care about, then the business case in this scenario is about how we can make more money by going into new markets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if this person speaks a different language, it's sharing stories. So is that what you're saying? You kind of have to adjust your approach.
Yeah, because the thing that I keep hearing and what I keep saying is that the ultimate thing that people think is going to get most founders to change their mind is that studies have shown. And clearly people don't give a shit about studies have shown, because these studies have shown the exact same thing for about 30 years and nothing has changed. Yet that's the thing that I keep hearing everyone say over and over again. But studies have shown that if you are a more diverse organization, then your sales will be 13.258% higher than the benchmark in your industry. It's like, who gives a damn? People care about that because they haven't seen it. And if they haven't seen it and there's nothing wrong with their business today and it's not diverse, then how do you make that argument? So you really have to understand your audience and then figure out what's going to allow you to finagle into their mind to do some type of inception where you're going to have to just drop little thoughts over time, breadcrumbs into this person's mind and psyche to see what's working in order to get them to change their mind and give you budget.
Well, and I was just connecting the dots between what you were saying, Bruce, and what Mylena was saying about curiosity earlier. I think there's power in the curiosity piece here, because if I hear leaders say diversity is important, I'm like, cool, great. Can I have some budget for a program? And they're like, oh, no, we don't have any budget. I'm like, okay, well, how important is it actually then, right? Like, and so asking those questions, and it takes a great deal of courage to go to leadership, to go to the owner of the company. I mean, I've worked primarily in kind of smaller companies, so I've always had a direct line to the CEO. It takes a little bravery to go to the CEO and, poke around and ask the curious questions and see if because you're going to usually land one of two places. Either they find their why and they're like, oh, I understand why this is important. And yes, of course I have to give you budget now. Like, I really get it. Or they find their why not, and they realize that they were just saying it was important because they knew that that was the right thing to say, but there's nothing behind it. And it's not actually important. And all these other things are important. And then you're kind of in the Coinstar spot of like, okay, well, we've just determined that this is not actually important to you. So maybe that's where we need to have you live for now, right? But I think that the curiosity piece of asking questions to get inside their head and really like unlock, it's two disparate things. You say this is important, but you won't fund it, you won't support it, you won't give resources to it. So like, is it important? And try to unlock the why behind that.
And a couple people have said Coinstart. I just want the audience to know we're talking about Coinbase.
Oh, so, Coinbase.
Because if they look up Coinstart, diversity fail, they will find
that was my bad.
I'll also throw in from about this like business case model. I know we're talking to a whole bunch of HR folks here, but if you can talk about how you can stretch diversity into your products and services is where you really will make a lot of impact. And that's where you'll start to get that dollar and cents business impact too as well. So, Aramark, we're a food service company. So we always talk about how, hey, we need diverse menus. We need to be representative of the clients and customers that we serve. And we also need to make sure that we're being responsible and appropriate when we're developing menus, right? Like if it's Taco Tuesday and we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, we're not just doing some gringo tacos out here with the hard shell and the ground beef, right? And the shredded cheese. Like that's not authentic Latin American fare, guys. Like I'm sorry to break it to you, but it's not. So still love it. Those are fantastic, but it's not authentic Latin, right? So, for us, having a diverse workforce helps us avoid that type of stuff, like avoid those faux pas, which then help us to then actually expand our customer base, to expand out who we're serving, expand who we're working with. We have just launched a religious ERG this past year, and we're hoping to get them more involved around kosher meal planning or inclusive uniforms. We have a uniform side of the business. How do we make sure, are we providing hijabs? Like that's the type of fun stuff that then the business leader's like, oh, I see that. Oh, I get it now. Like that's where this is coming into play. So if you can really tie it into like business and products, the products and services you're offering, you can make a long headway there.
Kayla, I think that's it. Oh, Marlena, go ahead. I find with my clients, they do this work because they are either because of pain. Either they are trying to avoid pain or they're trying to alleviate pain. And with that being said, by avoid pain, we have issues in terms of our employee relations. There are lots of complaints. There are lots of this, that, and the third. So they want to avoid those or minimize those kinds of internal issues. I see that a lot in terms of driving the diversity issues with organizations. Or on the other hand, they believe that their customers expect more diversity and they want to be in sync with those wishes. I don't necessarily know if I believe that any of my clients really buy into it solely for the emotional part of it, or simply it's the right thing to do. I want to believe that, but deep down, what I really see when we get into the actual work, it's usually because they're trying to combat internal challenges where they know employee dissatisfaction is very high and that's having an impact on productivity, or perhaps they anticipate that if they don't do something about those kinds of inclusivity issues, that they might in fact be confronting some harassment complaints down the line. So they're really trying to address both inclusion issues as well as harassment challenges all at one time. Or on the other hand, they are absolutely certain that the clients that they serve expect diversity in some capacity. But the emotional appeal in and of itself, I don't have a lot of confidence in that.
Marlena and Kayla, as I was listening to you both talk, and especially Kayla on your side, as you were giving the beautiful illustration around the cheese and Taco Tuesdays, I'm listening to that and I'm thinking that makes so much sense for, I think Aramark might be a public company, but either way, they're a very large company. And as HR leaders and whoever is listening to this is thinking about this conversation, I think the big company versus small company and public company versus private company plays a huge factor into this, because if you are a very large company and people are forcing you to give public reports on your diversity so you can get publicly shamed. I think that's one thing. But I know I'm specifically talking from the tech space myself as a founder of a tech company and as a founder of a tech company who primarily sells to HR. I know that I'm even in this echo chamber of only 99% of the time I'm talking to white women at tech companies between 25 and 54, because that's who I'm typically selling to. And I know that most of the companies that I sell to, who are mostly white, are also only selling to other companies that are almost all white. And so you get into this echo chamber where when somebody comes to talk to them about diversity, it's almost this whole new thing, as if they didn't even know that it was a diversity problem and it existed at all. Because if I'm a white male owning a company and all my employees are primarily white and all my strategic partners are white and the customers that I'm talking to are white and my investors are white, then it makes it a really hard case for people to say, hey, we got to diversify this thing and we have to have different people from different backgrounds. I do think that it definitely needs to be this business case of dollars and cents. But again, I come back to that. How do you make that business case when so many people have been so successful without the diversity? And I know I keep posing this question, but it's something that I really want. I'm posing it because I want more people to think about that, because I don't think that people are consciously aware that that's how other people are thinking about it. Because I've actually spoken to white male founders who have said, I want to be more diverse and I hear you, but it's so much easier to hire people in my network. And we're growing so fast and we're raising money so fast. And I'm saying, well, I hear you, but that sounds like bullshit. And that just sounds like a crazy excuse. And that's where we're having this disconnect of, look, I'm just trying to do whatever is the easiest and the fastest. Running a company is already hard enough. Now I need to worry about trying to make sure that my workforce is diverse. I just don't see the ROI that I'm going to get from that. And so I want people who are trying to make that business case to understand that that's the mindset that a lot of people are coming to the table with.
Yeah, there's something about I'm successful enough, so I don't, the ROI on my discomfort is not high enough for me to engage in that, right? It's easier for me to just hire my friend who looks like me, etc. That's an interesting dilemma. And I'm in my response, I'm of two minds. So in one case, I think, if you don't look like me, then you probably don't think like me. And if you don't think like me, then you can help me think differently and bigger and better, right? And so I can innovate and I can try new things and I can whatever as an entrepreneur. And the other side is maybe kind of to your earlier points of just not willing to change someone's mindset. Maybe that's the company you go like, cool, good luck to you. And we move on, right? I'm curious. Mylena, you look like you had something to say, or were you just waving?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I had this conversation with a client actually about hiring people just like yourself. And I was saying that as my business is growing, as I'm assembling my own team, literally a couple weeks ago, I looked around and I was like, wow, got a lot of Black women here. We've got a Latino woman on the team. I have one white woman on the team. I don't know any Asian people personally. And it didn't even occur to me that, wow, I mean, because we were just talking through it and I said, I don't have any of that on my team. And with that being said, we were talking about this notion of just reaching out to your network because it's convenient because of all of these things. And what it really comes down to is what I said earlier. You've got to have someone who's asking the question, who's being left out, what's being left out, and it has to be of value. Now, what I think is interesting to add to this conversation, when I first started reaching out to people because I'm growing and this kind of thing, it was all Black women. And what I have found, I like working with them because it's easy. They get my jokes and all of this good stuff. But what I also find is that I made certain assumptions that other people from other backgrounds wouldn't get it, or that they wouldn't necessarily be friendly or that they would be hostile. And I found that that hasn't been the case. And the other thing is, particularly as it relates to part of my marketing, they have added a lens to it that has been very useful, pointing out perspectives that were totally in my blind spot. And with that being said, just that simple, there's this thing I was reading about with respect to cognitive diversity, and it was talking about how we have on projects these incremental changes. When we're working on projects, when we work with people whose perspectives and skills are different than mine, it's like playing checkers in a way. That's the best way I can describe it. I might move one of my checkers forward and somebody else notices from where I've moved perspectives, angles, spots, opportunities on the chessboard that I didn't have in my viewpoint because of the way I'm moving my own checkers. And what I'm finding is that when I'm working with these other women with other backgrounds and other skills for me, they see things, they just frame them very differently than I do. And the issue is, frankly, being willing to do the work that comes up to make the communication process work. Because when somebody goes about a project in a way that's very different from you, sometimes we become defensive. That's not what I meant. That's not what I wanted. It doesn't make it wrong. It's just not what you do reflexively. And you've got to be willing to figure out, okay, what's the strength here? What's the benefit here? But if you keep doing the same thing the way you've always done it, then it's back to what you said, Kristen. Well, I think I have enough success and it's not enough value for me to do the work to figure out how to expand not only my circle, but the way that I think and to pick up new skills. It has to be something you're committed to. And frankly, it does take some extra work, but I have found that the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, because again, seeing how other people frame the same problem has been useful because it gets me to a place that when I'm talking to clients, I don't have as many moments where I'm caught off guard, or when I'm thinking about how to design a marketing campaign to appeal to someone, I have more ways to frame how I go about that work. And you have to just value the process. It's not as easy as it might be when you're dealing with people who you think are just like you, but it's worth the work.
That's great. That was, I don't even have a follow-up to that, Mylena. Thank you. I do want to ask another question from the people that wrote in, and this person was sort of challenged by white fragility becoming the focus of training and maybe unconscious bias training, and that actually upsetting Black people even more. So I'm curious, I know that's not really technically a question, but I'd love for this group to discuss that a little bit and how that might show up in our organizations and what we can do to defend against it. When that comes up, Beth, do you have an immediate reaction or thought about it?
Yeah, it was an interesting question when I read it, and I've been thinking about it a lot. I mean, I think there's definitely, I mean, going back to my comment from much earlier in this about just kind of uncovering your own sort of just like reality of being raised in a racist country and taught a racist history, and maybe only realizing the depth of that now. White fragility has always existed, but I think it's like reaching this crescendo and can sometimes overpower. It is an important conversation, but it's a balance to make sure that it's not overpowering the other voices in the room, and that it's not all of a sudden like we came here to talk about the Black experience at work, but actually I'm just going to suck out all the air because I need to talk about my experience of being white, right? Like that, I think, is what this question is sort of getting at. And I haven't, I'll be honest, I haven't had the experience of that happening in this exact situation. But I think if I did see it, that I would have to kind of, I don't know. I mean, it's maybe leaning into the curiosity of like, why do you think that is your experience is the most important thing right now? Like, why is, I don't know. It is really, really tough because their experience is valid and they're having real feelings and their experience is as valid as anybody else's. But if that's not why we're here, if that's not what this conversation that we've gathered here today is supposed to be about, then maybe we shouldn't dive too deep on your personal experience. And maybe there's time that like, I can buy you lunch later and we can talk. I don't know. I would actually be really interested to hear perspectives from the rest of the panel on this. And if you, especially Kayla, I know you do so much of this work just in your role, if you've seen this come up.
Yeah, I actually have to piggyback a little bit off of that because I think at the end of the day, this goes back to that whole, when we were back in June or July, we were talking about, diversity and inclusion is important, but this conversation is not about diversity and inclusion. It's about being anti-racist, right? It's about, it's about the specific subtopics and understanding. We can't lump everything into these one general conversations. Yes, there's a space for us to talk about white fragility because we got to call it out a little bit. We got to put it out there. We got to acknowledge it. We got to educate some folks on it. But sometimes these conversations aren't about white fragility. Sometimes we need to create safe spaces for Black folks to come together and just talk and lay it out and hear it, regardless of how you feel about it on the reciprocal end of whether or not you've experienced it, whether or not you will identify as a racist person. Does anybody actually identify as a racist person?
Not here, but
I don't know if you identify. Whether or not all of these things, we have to create these spaces and be intentional. I think that's something that I do as well as my boss. When we talk about this ally network and we talk about creating these spaces, we're very intentional about, okay, well, what's the purpose? What's the objective? I went back to that panel discussion again. I'm going to keep bringing it up a couple times here, but I can't tell you how we had maybe it was only 2 meetings, but each an hour long of how we were so intentional about who is on this board, who's on this panel. If we have a panel of all Black folks, what does that say? We have a panel of all white folks, what does that say? We can have, we were so intentional behind it. And if you're leaders in this space and you're trying to facilitate more dialogue and you're trying to make some change happen in your organization, I just ask that you sit down and talk about, well, what is your objective here? And then making sure you're creating spaces for various conversations. And if you are not only focused on the white experience, you're not only focused maybe even on just the Black experience, you're not focused on the general experience of people of color holistically, because that's a whole different conversation as well. And then if you're going to go into other subtopics like unconscious bias, that's what you're talking about at that time. You're going to talk about diversity and maturity in the model, going through that and what we need to do to increase inclusion. That's great too as well, but you need to be intentional.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about white fragility coming into focus in a training, right? I think there's 2 things that pop out to me. One is how often we have ground rules in the beginning that's like, okay, this is a safe space, like everyone is valid, like that. And I wonder what sort of message that sends to people, right? Am I as a white person implicitly getting the message that oh, good, I can say whatever I want, right? And not have to have the responsibility of the impact, which leads me to my second thing around intention and impact, right? And my experience of white people and people in the majority is that when they say something offensive, when I say something offensive, and I see that it hurts someone, my immediate instinct is to defend my intentions. I did not intend to hurt you. Oh my God, please listen to me. That was not my intention. My intention was this. Like, please, you have to know that I have really good intentions, right? And I think that's the fragility. And so I think if we can switch the training and switch the conversation to be like, cool, happy for your intentions. You need to own your impact, right? And like focusing on that. Like we spend so much time talking about our intent. And I think we need to spend a little bit more time talking about our impact and teaching people to just go, fuck, I'm sorry. I won't do that again. And then move on, right? As opposed to, well, no, but my intentions were so good.
Yeah, Kristen, we actually spend a lot of time talking about creating, we've actually, so I attended a inclusive communications training over the summer in the time of when I had some more downtime to actually be on all those webinars. We were all trying to find some time there. And they introduced a really interesting concept of switching spaces from safe spaces to brave spaces. Which you start their meeting off with just saying, and brave has it's like a whole acronym, something around like, and respecting boundaries, being respectable, and regardless of the opinion here, we're respecting that opinion, and then we're also being aware and vulnerable, and then I think, and also like there's something like confidentiality is looped into there as well, and that this is a safe space at the end of the day, but because we can't assume people's safety. Right? We can't assume what my safety is the same thing as your safety. We're now going to create brave spaces where everyone feels comfortable enough to speak up, in a space where maybe they might be checked about it, but know it's coming from a place of compassion. Know that this is a dialogue that we want to have, so that we can all grow and learn from it. Because even if I don't want to hear your opinion, hearing your opinion still helps me grow at the end of the day, and learn more. Whether it be to how can I better articulate myself so that we can like dialogue a bit more on your opinion and understand where you're coming from, but it still helps to grow the group at the end, regardless.
Yeah, that's great. Mylena, what would you add? I mean, given your experience in training and development and consulting, what would you add about this sort of kind of white fragility fear and concern and I guess experience that a lot of these trainings kind of devolve into focusing on that?
I might be the sellout here. And what I mean by that is when I go into spaces and I'm talking about diversity topics, a lot of times I am the only person of color, the only Black person in the room. And oh my God, help me if they have been compelled to attend, because it has a whole different level of energy. Once I was with a group of people, frankly, I knew from the get-go, everybody came in looking like somebody had peed in their Cheerios. Nobody wanted to be there. And I was like, oh, this is going to be interesting. And what I decided to do, and it worked, when they were doing introductions, I just started writing on the whiteboard the various elements of diversity that made me uncomfortable. Because what I decided to do that because I felt like that would make them feel like I was safe to talk to, because it would make them feel less threatened, that I'm not coming here to tell them that they are a group of racist white folks. And frankly, I found that that changed the dynamic of the room, because what I was able to talk about was they're all spaces where some of us have some privilege in some spaces. There are spaces where some of us, frankly, have our own biases, whether we've identified them or not. And by talking about the things that I didn't like about diversity, ironically, I started with church. I was like, yeah, I don't want to go to church with white people because y'all music is terrible, blah, blah, blah. And what it turned into was this space where people were able to just kind of, okay, this is not a beat us up day. And then we were able to have a conversation about different types of unconscious bias and how it shows up. And then talking about, well, where are these spaces in the organization where you think people are having to cover up their real identity? But that was the way I had to approach that, because frankly, I felt like if I was going to go in and take the tack that, this is not about, making them feel comfortable or whatnot, it was going to be a useless day. At the end of the day, I chose the angle that I thought that would get them to actually pay attention. It wasn't about coddling them, but it was really about thinking about how is it that I think about the needs of this audience so that they can hear me, and then so that they will engage. And I think sometimes when we talk about the white fragility component, I do think that there's merit to it. I mean, I talk about white women tears all the time. I was like, oh my God, don't cry. Whatever you do, please don't cry. And I think about that quite a bit. And I think that there is a place to talk about, you need to be willing to learn from somebody else's experiences. And it's not always about you. But I think we have to balance that with thinking about, okay, how do we create an avenue so that people feel safe enough so that they can hear? And frankly, depending on what the setting is, what I believe the actual issue is, I will lean into it, because for me, I don't necessarily feel like I need to always approach with a hammer. And I'm not saying that, being very direct and blunt about it is always approaching with a hammer, but I'm really looking for what do I need to do to get them to at least check in so we can hear.
That's good stuff. I like it. And I can only imagine that the white people's church music is subpar for your standards. I can't. I have no defense. We are at time. Thank you all for being a part of another lively discussion. Bruce, Mylena, Beth, Kayla, thank you so much. Michael, Kelly, Tori, and the rest of the DisruptHR folks, thank you. And to our participants who dialed in, thank you so much for joining us for 90 minutes of hopefully very useful, helpful, and a little bit fun dialogue. And we'll see you again, hopefully soon. Take care, everybody.
Hi, everyone. Do we hang around for a little debrief again? I think we did that last time, right? And people were still sitting there.